The 1939 register, it's the most comprehensive survey of the population of England and Wales that was ever taken. It was taken in September 1939, so just after war was declared, and the object of it was to get everybody issued with an identity card and a ration book, and later on it was also used for conscription purposes. The way they took the 39 register was just the same way as the census had been taken every 10 years since 1841, that an official would come round and leave a form with every household and every institution, every hotel to be filled in. And what was supposed to be written down was the details of every person who was in that household or institution on registration night, whether or not they regularly lived there. And then the same official would come round and collect the forms a few days later. The plans were in place to actually take the 1941 census, and if there hadn't been a war, or if there had been a very short war, that census would have gone ahead. But there were extra contingency plans to recruit extra people. They're called enumerators, the people who go door to door, and the districts were to be broken down into even smaller ones than for a census. So the enumerator would get round this comparatively small district in a much faster time. So there was a whole army of supplementary enumerators just ready and waiting, who would only be used for a wartime register. They wouldn't be required for the full census if that ever happened, of course, which it never did because we were at war in 1941. The register and the census, they're very, very similar in a lot of ways, that they list information about individuals, and it was taken in the same way as a census, with the enumerator going door to door and collecting the forms. But the big difference is that the point of a census is to find out about the population as a whole. It's a big picture thing. It's like a really, really detailed market research study, if you like. So provided you get most people, that's fine. If you leave a few people out, that's a shame, but it doesn't affect the overall result. With the register, the object was quite different. It was important to get every single person. It's at a particularly key point in British history because, well, for two reasons. One, it's the nation on the eve of war. Although war had already been declared, it was still the phony war period, if you like. Children had been evacuated from the cities, but this conscription hadn't started yet. So the only people in the army were the regular army and the reserves. So the nation was still in a wait and see stage. The other really important thing about it is it's the only really comprehensive listing of the population that's going to be available for England and Wales between 1921 and 1951, because there was no census in 1941 because of the war, and the 1931 census, unfortunately, that was destroyed by fire during the Second World War. So between 1921 and 1951, the 39 register is it. That bridges the gap. Everyone who's in the register, you will get their full name and their date of birth, which is new because the census only ever asked for an age. An actual date of birth is really useful. Then you'll get each person's occupation and their marital status, and also whether they've been in the armed forces or not. And you get their address because that's how the records are arranged by address. So it's quite a lot of information, not as much as had been gathered in some previous censuses, but still really useful because it should have absolutely everybody in it. They didn't miss people out.
What we've done, we've tried to put the 1939 register into context. So as well as seeing the information about your family in 1939, you'll see photos from the time, you'll see newspaper articles from the time, and you'll see maps as well. So you'll see where the people were living, going back to the Victorian era actually, and then in 1939, and then right up to the present day. So there really is a complete picture of the community in 1939. There are 7,000 volumes that comprise the 1939 register, And it took us over a year to digitise and transcribe and put together. To give you some idea of that number of volumes, if you stacked them on top of each other, you'd have a column twice the height of St Paul's Cathedral.
I think historians find it fascinating to get all that information that was previously available, now available online and much easier to access. Not only historians, also hobbyists, people who are interested in family history will now have an opportunity to add to their family history work another chapter, the chapter of 1939. But I would argue this information is interesting for everybody. Most people would like to know where they come from. Most people in this country will hopefully remember somebody in their family who was alive in 1939, and this will be a unique opportunity to understand what their life was like in 1939.
Because those are people who were born less than 100 years ago and who are not known to be deceased. Of course, as time goes on, more and more records will be released as more and more people pass the 100-year mark, and as people can produce proof of death for people born less than 100 years ago. So there will be more and more records added to the visible part of the site. It's generally assumed that after 100 years, most people will have died. Obviously, there are people who live longer than that. And in the case of somebody who is over 100 years old and finds themselves in there and they don't want their record to be open and visible, they can have that closed.
National Archives is the official archive of the UK government and for England and Wales. We have over 1,000 years of history here dating all the way back to the Domesday Book. And one of our responsibilities is to collect, preserve and provide access to public records in whatever format, whether that's paper or whether it's digital. And actually the 1939 register is a very good example of how we're opening up access to our content, working with partners like Findmypast.
It's fascinating for a number of reasons. One, any historical record is interesting, but like any census, it's a snapshot in time. It's like where everybody is standing when the music stops, if you like. And it's just what the whole nation was doing at one point, where everybody was, what their occupations were. When you look at the bigger picture and you can see what whole towns, whole streets, communities, what they were like at that particular point in time. And of course it's a particularly key time because in a matter of years, months, even weeks, it had changed forever. So the building that somebody was enumerated in, that might have been bombed to nothing in a couple of years' time. So it really was the end of peacetime Britain.